right, well, if you hear that music, that means we made it to an episode 2, the Spring Blake College Football Show. I'm Spring Blake. This is a college football show. Thank you for coming back if you made it through episode 1. If you're new and starting off on episode 2, thank you. Welcome to the show. Please support this show wherever possible. If you are on social media, head to Twitter, head to TikTok. The handle is at SpringBlake'S, Spring Blake College Football. Makes sense. Head over there, follow me, interact with my content, share it with your friends. If you are listening on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you may get your podcast, please follow it. Please subscribe to it. Please download, share, 5-star review, whatever is possible to do there to support the show. Please do it. I promise you, if you give this show support, I will give you content in tenfold that makes it worth your while. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you. First of all, I always love to give a shout out for how sick this studio, aka spare bedroom, looks. JMU football helmet to my right, a Post Malone, Stoney, White Iverson, Wilson basketball to my left, Spring Blake behind me here, Busch Light sign behind me here. You wouldn't think that this is just some dingy old spare bedroom that nobody uses at my house. If you're on YouTube, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, interact with me. Like I said, I want to make this thing work. I can't do it without your support. I promise you it will be worth your while. So yes, this is the Spring Blake College Football Show, your favorite ball knower's favorite ball knower show. I'm not going to say that one twice, a little bit of a mouthful. Before we get started, thank you again to Danny K Design. That's at DANIKAY.design on Instagram. Did all of the visuals for this show, the logo, the graphics. She did a fantastic job. And thank you to the Spice and Tea Exchange of Nashville for being our presenting sponsor. Now, what is the Spice and Tea Exchange of Nashville? If you weren't here on episode 1, it's the business I own and run in Nashville. I think saying presenting sponsor means I get to use some expenses. I don't think I really actually am using any expenses, but if I ever wanted to, I could, because we are proudly presented by the Spice and Tea Exchange of Nashville. If you are a tea drinker, if you like to cook, head over to the Spice and Tea Exchange of Nashville, submit an online order at spiceandtea.com/Nashville, use the code SBCFB, Spring Blake College Football, and get 20% off your first order. Thank you again to Danny K Designs and the Spice and Tea Exchange of Nashville. Okay, a couple of notes and adjustments from this first episode. I think if I did this right, and I'm looking at an iPad right now, so I can't see what's coming back at me. I think I fixed the lighting on the YouTube channel. Last episode felt a little dark. Hopefully this one's a little bit lighter. It doesn't look as dungeony when I try and do some zoomed in clips, so hopefully that's fixed. If not, try again for episode 3 this Friday. Another thing, I also realized I can just cut in and out of this show. I'm not actually doing it live, so I can cut this in and out whenever I want to take my water breaks. So we're going to do that from here on out. If I need to take a break to drink some water, which I do, it's almost an hour-long show. I can't just sit up here. I've already got cotton mouth. I will just cut those out. We'll put some funny clips and transitions in here to make it worth your while. So glad that I could learn both those things the hard way on episode 1. We'll improve them from 2 to 3 to 5 million.
Balake. Where is Balake at?
See what I mean? Great transition right there. I think I'm just going to use that, and you want to go to war Balake a million times whenever I need to take a drink of water. Okay, so that was the show introduction. A couple of notes. One thing I want to do at the beginning of every episode, or maybe episodes where it applies, is to self-scout myself. You know, I think a lot of the time people can sit on these shows and just spew information, and people in the comments will be like, well, that wasn't right, and you mixed that name up, or this stat wasn't right, and they just go on with their merry day. I told you from the very start, I'm not going to be perfect with this thing. I still don't know the ins and outs of everything in the world of college football. So there was one note, and I don't think it was actually that big of a mistake, but I do want to make the correction. Keandre Lambert-Smith is in the NFL right now, and he was a member of the 2023 Penn State offense. He had 650 yards, which was shorter than whoever had 720 last year. So again, this is 2 seasons ago. And then he went to Auburn last year, was nearly a 1,000-yard receiver for the Tigers, now in the NFL, battling it out in training camp for the Chargers. Yes, that is someone that made it to the NFL in Drew Aller's passing offense, was a talented wide receiver at Penn State. I will say he didn't really get to meet the marriage of offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki, so it's tough to say that he wouldn't have also been great at Penn State last year. Maybe that was a key reason that they weren't as successful in those big games against Notre Dame and Ohio State. Oregon as well, too. That being said, I wanted to make the adjustment because afterwards I was like, oh, wait a minute. They do have a receiver that is now playing in the NFL. So just wanted to make that correction.
My name's Blake.
See? Fooled you there. Didn't even need water. Just wanted to take it so we could hear another transition. All right, today's episode I am so excited for. Went into a lot of research the last couple days building this one out. I'm throwing my Sweet 16 birthday party. It's Blake's Sweet 16. We're going to go through my top 16 teams heading into the college football season. Now, I will probably do one more of these ahead of week 0, just in case there were any adjustments. We won't go in as much detail as we're about to right now because I want to break down, okay, I have Team X at 16. Here's why I think they are that high. Here's why I don't have them that much higher than that. We're going to go through all those details. I will allow myself the next few weeks of fall camp to make any necessary adjustments before we head into the regular season. Guys get hurt. We start to hear reports that, oh, hey, this true freshman's really coming along strong, or this quarterback position's actually going different than we projected it heading into fall. I want to be able to make those corrections accordingly as stuff comes out about these teams. So we will do one more, but I wanted to get my top 16 ahead or in the early stages of fall camp. One thing I want to say, my Sweet 16 rocked. I had such a fun birthday party. My parents were doing an addition on their house at the time, and we had this revamped little back patio area. And it lined up perfectly with my 16th birthday party. So I said, Mom, Dad, let's go big. We invited more people than I was friends with. There were definitely people there that either one hated me or I didn't really like them too much. But it was like, hey, Blake's throwing a party. Let's do it. Great time. Local celebrity showed up as well too. Local future celebrity showed up to the birthday party. Thank you for your appearance there. Not going to name names. Anywho, really fun birthday party, had a great time, and so now we're going to do a Sweet 16 here on this show, and we're going to do it all throughout the regular season. And now you might be asking, like, hey, Blake, why'd you come up with 16? Well, the college football playoffs, 99% likelihood that we are going to be heading to 16 teams, so why not just do a 16-team playoff ranking each week instead of having you listen to my internal debates over what team needs to be ranked 23rd or 19th on a given week. I'll be honest, I'll get into this again once we get started. I did a top 16. I changed 14, 15, and 16 at least 10 different times because I think what I realized is there are 13 teams I really like and then about 10 that I hate half of them. And so I had to figure out who I hated the least. That being said, if we went any further than 16, it would be disgusting. It would be a waste of our time, so I'm just not going to put any of us through that. I do want to get, I don't know, I think it'd be fun for the YouTube. You know all those, how girls on their birthdays will do like the big 21 or 24. I want to get the big like white inflatable balloons for 16. And that way, during the regular season, we could just pull these up and it'll be another Sweet 16 birthday party. Anywho, that's really dumb. But yes, so today we're just going to go 16-1, my top teams entering the season. There is one caveat that is super important when discussing this Sweet 16 and next week when we start to get into conference previews. We're going to have an episode where we do SEC, Big 10, ACC, Big 12. Those are going to be power rankings when I do those. For here, when we do my top 16, my Sweet 16, it is a power ratings system. And there is a distinct difference between power rating and power ranking. So whenever I put out my Sweet 16, again, it's a power rating system, which solely pertains to how I think teams will stack up against one another if they were to play on a neutral field. Conference breakdowns will be standing projections, and that is just a power ranking system. Now, I know they sound very similar. That might sound confusing. Maybe it's not confusing at all, and I don't need to go into this much detail. But just to make things easier, I'm going to use some real life examples to just set the stage for what I mean by the difference between power rating and power ranking. For instance, this upcoming season, this list, I have Florida in my Sweet 16 as a top 10 team in the nation because I think that they have the roster and the coaching staff of a top 10 team. However, if this was to be a power ranking system where I predict how teams would finish, the Gators would be outside of my top 10 because their schedule is embarrassingly difficult. And they would probably, so they'll finish below that rating in the ranking system. I think I just made that more confusing by the way I tried to explain it. Here's what it means. This ranking system here, this ratings system, is how great I think your team is and how talented I think your team is. When I do rankings next week, that is saying, okay, depending on your schedule, I think you're going to place here. Even though you might be a better or worse team, your schedule plays a huge role into where those standings end up. So when people come on here and they're like, you have so-and-so as a top 8 team in the country, they already lost their week 1 game. I'll say, well, it's not based off their record or their standing in the conference. It's based on if I was to take X team and put them on field against X team, I think this team would be better than that team. Conversely, let's just do another one. Let's say I think James Madison, go Dukes, will finish with the best G5 record in the nation and take the G5 spot in the playoffs. Now, in a power ranking system, they'd be a top 12 team. They would take that, or a top 16 team eventually when we get to the playoffs. They would take that top G5 spot. But in the power rating system, I think we can all agree, kind of like with Boise State last year, they weren't the 12th best team in the nation. They just took the 12th best spot in the power ranking system. I don't know if I just did that well. I think I did. I think you guys get it. I think you guys are ball knowers. This is a show for ball knowers. I don't think I needed to explain myself that much. Self-scouting, probably went into too much detail there. We're here to talk about the top 16 teams in the nation heading into the new year, so let's get it rolling.
Blake. What?
So to kick off my Sweet 16, I said it before, I put about 7 or 8 different teams in this 16 slot, but I landed on Michigan. Because I think despite all the questions that I do have about their roster, and even a little bit about their coaching staff, I've grown to trust Michigan's defensive unit over the last however many years more than I can trust a lot of other positional units in football. So let's talk about why I have them in this top 16. They should be stacked again on every level of the defense. They lost some great defensive tackles in Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, but Derek Moore, TJ Guy on the edge are going to be some game wreckers. It's almost going to be like they're stronger on edge this year after being stronger at defensive tackle the year before. And I also think they have one of the best linebacker tandems in the country in Ernest Hausman and Jayshon Barnum. And even though the secondary is probably the weakest unit of the defense, again, in Michigan, I grow to trust that it consistently can churn out talent on a year-in, year-out basis. It might still be a top 10 to 15 group, and they get back all Big Ten safety Rod Moore, who missed last year with injury. I also think Wink Martindale, let's try that again. Wink Martindale did a nice job defensively as the season went on. I think it was a little bit of an adjustment period for Michigan when he came in from the NFL. Early on, there was some defensive lapses. I mean, you think about that Texas game and how they were just running up and down the field on him. Michigan's defense, obviously, as the year went on and the way they shut down Ohio State at the end of the season, much better group than where they started. So I should expect another bump in production from this defense. even though they lost some guys, I think as a whole the unit will perform better. Now, why don't I have them higher than 16? I think it's pretty obvious. There is just too much unknown on this offense. And it's fine to have unknowns in August. I'm going to say that for more than half the teams on this list. But you better get the answers that you're hoping for, because if not, this offensive unit could drag the team down. Bryce Underwood could be great. You know, the phenom freshman could come in right away, earn the starting job in camp, and just set the country on fire. Or he could be just like 99% of true freshman quarterbacks and need to sit behind Mikey Keene for an entire season. And then Mikey Keene could also be fine. He could be a serviceable quarterback, but he also could struggle against the heightened level of competition. And Michigan is also not oozing, this crazy amount of talent at its wide receiver positions or even tight end. Strangely enough, the wide receivers probably couldn't be worse than they were last year. So maybe even some new blood and some rising names in that position group make them better than they were in 2024. I think the offensive line is good, not great. And even their usual strength that they had in the running back these last few years isn't as elite as we had come to expect it in the Jim Harbaugh era. Although the addition of Justice Haynes to go along with Jordan Marshall might be a nice tandem for them to lean on early in the season while this new quarterback is getting its feet wet. And then the last thing why I don't have them any bit higher is that he seems like a great dude. I'm not totally bought in on Sharon Moore as one of these upper echelon head coaches, and it's fair to consider him in that group because he is running an upper echelon program at Michigan. I think this year is going to be a really great way to evaluate him as a head coach because the work and development he does for this offense will go a long way into Michigan's success. But as I said, I still have them as one of the top 16 teams in the country because I trust their defense more than I trust a lot of positional units in college football.
You want to go to war, Balaki?
All right, so my next team, like I said, these first three here, I kind of have reasons to hate them all, which honestly speaks really good volume to teams 13 through 1. But I think Miami has a roster and coaching staff that is worthy of being inside my top 16. Despite the wide variety of results we could see from them on a football field. So Mario Cristobal has done a really good job building this team from the inside out. Former offensive lineman really puts an emphasis on the trenches, and they're really good there. Francis Mauigoa might be the best tackle in next year's draft. Some people aren't as high on him as they are the guys in Utah, but regardless, he is going to be a really strong player there up front. They bring in a nice transfer from TCU to start at center. Defensively, Ruben Bain is the guy people have known the last few years, and hopefully he's fully healthy this season after missing some time last year. They have strong depth on the interior, and Akeem Mesidor will be the other edge defensively. So what I like about Miami is they're really solid in the trenches. Now, why I don't have them any higher than that is because everything else might be good and not great. Like, outside of offensive line and defensive line, there isn't one position group I can just hang my hat on. First of all, I wouldn't hang the hat on because number one rule of this show is the hat always stays on. I'm not hanging the hat on anything. And unless you're going to tell me that Carson Beck is that dude, I'm going to say right back to you, is he? Like, I'd love for Carson Beck to come in and be great, but even if he's great, he's still getting like 80% of what they got out of Cam Ward last year. And here's the thing, I don't think it's going to be that great. And I also don't think the weapons around him are like substantially better than what he got at Georgia. I think they might be even or even a little bit lower. It could be a good group. The back end of the defense could be improved. The running game could be there, but there's just so many things that I'm waiting to find out that I can't put Miami anything higher than 15. And honestly, like I said, with them, Michigan, and this next team, I really struggled even putting them in the top 16 conversation. So let's move along to number 14. We got to talk a little bit about this team on Monday's show, and I'm happy we get to dive into them a little bit more. I've got the NIL transfer kings of the world, Texas Tech is my number 14 team in the country. I'm going to say it right now, just in case you're a fan of the conference. This is the only Big 12 team I have in my top 16. And maybe we'll just spend a couple seconds stating why. I think the top 4 to 5 contenders in the Big 12 are really good programs. And I would just say they're all in that 17 to 25 range. If this was a top 25, you'd see a lot of Big 12. I just don't have them in there because I think all of them are really good, not great. Texas Tech, to me, is where I've landed on as the best overall team. So let's get into why. There's a ton of positional groups where I know I'm getting something either great or really sturdy. Baron Morton is a super sturdy quarterback. He's experienced and productive at the quarterback position. Their receivers are a nice combo of returning talent and portal acquisitions. Caleb Douglas and Coy Aiken were two of the best options they had last year, and they'll be joined by Reggie Virgil, who comes in from Miami of Ohio, and Terrence Carter in from Louisiana. I believe Terrence Carter is a tight end. I didn't mark that down. That might be a correction we make next episode. They added new pieces on the offensive line, but good ones. Will Jados, Howard Simpson are going to be the new tackles for the team, and Hunter Zambrano comes over from the FCS level, highly touted, really nice portal acquisition there on the interior. They'll join Sheridan Wilson and Davison Carter, and while it is a new group, it should be on paper, and I'm reading this off of a paper, a really good group. They did the same thing along the defensive line, plucking away 4 really strong starters to muck things up. The big name to know is David Bailey, who comes from Stanford, prized possession at the edge position in this transfer portal, and Lee Hunter is one of the names in the middle to keep an eye on. So, okay, that's why I have Texas Tech a little bit higher than everybody else in the Big 12 and as my number 14 team in the country. Why don't I have them any higher? Well, if you just listen to everything I said, it is a lot of new pieces that will be trying things out on a football field for the first time this September. Names on paper can create a top 15 worthy roster. Seeing it all click together on a field is an entirely different story. They also need to get it going pretty quick because they face Utah in week 4, and Utah always has kind of this strong retention. They have chemistry year over year. There's not a whole lot new in Utah, so I'd be worried about kind of the experience edge in that one. And then they also have a really tough stretch in the kind of early parts of their Big 12 schedule where they have to face Kansas, Arizona State, and Kansas State in the span of a month. So while I think by the end of this year we could be saying, man, Texas Tech, they're one of the best 15 teams in the nation. If they don't get it together in that first 6-7 weeks, they might not have a chance to compete for a conference title because the pieces were too new and they didn't click right away as we had hoped. That being said, I also think there are some other actual issues outside of just putting things together. The running back room and secondary are not the greatest groups in the world. They lost Taj Brooks, really talented running back, to the NFL. He's no longer there. Secondary is a little bit weaker as well too. And like every other position group, they've added guys. I just don't think it's as strong as the additions at receiver, at offensive line, and defensive line. And then the last thing I'll say is just Joey McGuire, man. We are really going to find out if he's the real deal or not in Lubbock. There shouldn't be too many reasons for them to struggle in the Big 12. Everything has kind of been handed to him this season in terms of just funds put into the program, talent on a lot of positions. It's really take this team and go be a great head coach. We're going to find out one way or another. All right, so let's move in now to my top 13. And my top 13, I feel really strong about this group. I didn't have any qualms putting any of these teams in here. And we're going to start it off with last year's playoff darlings. They are back, and they're better than before. We spoke about them on Monday's episode. It's the Indiana Hoosiers, led by Kurt Cignetti. Go Dukes. All right, so a lot of this stuff we discussed on Monday, so I'll breeze through it a little bit quicker. They have one of the best head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator trios in the nation, and the team returns its star players, most of them, with some key portal additions. Fernando Mendoza, we spoke about him. He's one of my favorite portal additions of the offseason. I don't think I gushed enough about him on Monday. I think this dude is a legit legit thrower of the football. And I think he's going to be fantastic with Mike Shanahan at offensive coordinator. Surratt, the premier wideout, as we said, go Dukes. But they rounded out the group as well, too. They've got a speedster, Omar Cooper Jr., and Mekhi Jackson to be the number 3 wideout. Everything else outside of those position groups that I just said, or maybe just coaching, quarterback, wide receiver, is just really sturdy, reliable, top 20 quality in the nation. I don't love the running back room right now, but the offensive line should be strong enough to elevate their abilities, open things up for them in the run game. Mikal Kamara, we already talked about. Defensively, go Dukes. They did add some complementary pieces to go along him up front. Stephon Daly, Hoja Wheeler, Aiden Fisher, go Dukes. The star linebacker, leader of the defense, D'Angelo Pons, go Dukes. Stud corner. We talked about him last week. Now, the secondary might be the weakest unit of the group, but as I said, I think they have a star at the front of it. So why don't I have them higher? Because I just said I don't think they have a difference maker at the running back position, which can be pivotal late in the year for Big Ten football programs. You know, when it's December and you're going to Michigan or you're playing in Penn State, or, you know, thankfully they get Iowa and Illinois pretty early in the season, but those games in December would be brutal if you don't have a tailback. I think running back is a super important position, even in the modern league, where it's very pass happy, and you can get things done in a lot of creative ways. I don't know who is going to be the guy. They will eventually have a guy, just as I said with some of these other teams. I just don't know who it is at this point in the season. So I don't love their running back room. They've got great guys, as I've mentioned, at a lot of those positions. The depth behind it worries me just a tad, where, you know, some bad injury luck could go your way, some bad injury luck could come your way, and then all of a sudden you're sitting there being like, man, we really had 2 to 3 stars on defense, and now we're down to just one of them. And the guys behind them maybe are a year away from being that dude. So I do worry about the overall depth on the roster. And then just a small thing as well, too, I'm curious to see how big of a role Tino Sunseri played in the success of their offense last year. He was the quarterback's coach. Curtis Rourke had an amazing year. I still think that Mike Shanahan is a great offensive coordinator, but if their offense does take a dip in production and Tino Sunseri is over at UCLA running their offense and they're flying off the charts, it might be one of those like, oh, well, who really was the key factor into how things went last season? So that's another thing I'm keeping my eye on. And then allow me 1% of doubt that last year was just some crazy fluke and mirage. I don't think it was, because in the way that they dominated a lot of those teams, could it have been a fluky year from Indiana? I'll give it a 1% chance. So that's another reason why I can't bump them any higher than my 13th team in the nation.
Balake. Where is Balake at?
All right, so let's keep chugging along. Despite the questions I have about LSU entering the season, I can't deny that their roster and coaching staff is of top 16 quality, and I've got them here as my 12th team in the country heading into this new season. Now, the why they are this high is pretty obvious. Skill players standpoint, they're one of the best in the nation. Garrett Nussmeier, obviously top 3 quarterback. Caden Durham had a fantastic rookie season despite the running offense being clunky as a whole. If he takes another step this year, you could see just how dynamic the offense truly could be if they can run and throw the ball. And look, the wide receiver room of Nick Anderson, Barry Brown, and Aaron Anderson, who comes in as a transfer, should be a top 5 group, a top 5 wide receiver room in the entire country. And they have a deep tight end room to go with that as well. You know, Brian Kelly, as disliked as he might be, is still one of the better head coaches in the sport. And Blake Baker is one of my favorite defensive coordinators in the game right now. The way that his players fly around on defense is something to behold. There's great buy-in in his defensive system. And a lot like some of these other coaches, year 2, year 3, it just gets that much more comfortable for some of the players on that roster. So why don't I have them higher? It starts on the offensive line. You lose 3 starters to the NFL. And while they have guys ready to step into those roles, it remains to be seen how quickly they can gel as a new unit. To make things worse, I feel terrible for them. in their first few weeks of the season. I believe it's in their first month. They obviously opened the season with Clemson. We haven't talked about them yet. Their defensive line might be one of the best in the nation. So you have to go week 1, fresh new group, and just be like, oh my God, who is this that we are up against? And then week 4, Florida. Haven't talked about Florida yet. Another unit, one of the best defensive lines, Caleb Banks at D tackle. They've got a Sapp on the edge, like a really good group there. So I'm concerned about the offensive line. If you can't find it in the first month, does it kind of fall apart because you're getting your asses kicked by some of the premier groups in the nation? So I feel bad about that. I don't think Joe Sloan is a bad coach, and I believe he's going to be calling plays again, but I do think he needs to force himself to just call a run and dial up the run game early and often in the season. I just feel like he was so quick to abandon it at times for LSU last year, and it put them in a really vulnerable position. It put Nuss in a really vulnerable position where he had to do too much on a week-in, week-out basis. Obviously led to a 12-pick season. So I don't think that is what is going to be... I don't think that's going to make for a successful season here at LSU, and I'd love to see if their offensive play caller can step things up a little bit more and get more involved into the run game. And while I do think Blake Baker is a great defensive coordinator, this team isn't really littered with defensive talent in the way they were in the eras that predated Brian Kelly. I think the linebacking core is great. Harold Perkins, hopefully fully healthy, is one of those guys that a few years ago as a true freshman, you were like, this is one of the future NFL stars in this game. It hasn't been as linear, his growth. It's definitely been a little bit up and down, but Whit Weeks was one of the best linebackers in the nation last year. If that tandem can really take a next step, this defense will fly around. I think the front line and the secondary are fine, but it's not the top 10 to 15 caliber that we've come to expect out of LSU. So another reason why I think they might not be higher than the 12th team in the nation. I just don't think they have as much juice defensively as I would have hoped to expect coming into a new year.
My name's Blake.
So I sat on this one for a while. I am all the way bought in on the Oklahoma Sooners. I think this is one of the more talented rosters in the sport, and I think it's got a really strong coaching staff, which is why I have them as my 10th rated team in the nation. So let's start off with why I have them this high. The biggest upgrade any team made this offseason might have been adding John Mateer at quarterback and Ben Arbuckle at offensive coordinator, both coming from Washington State last year. Old heads love to say let's see how you do in the big bad SEC. I'm here to tell you it's going to work, and I think this is one of the best quarterback offensive coordinator marriages in the entire nation. I have no concerns about it working despite having a heightened level of competition. Arbuckle, I'm just saying, maybe they keep him around in Oklahoma for a little bit. I think this is going to be one of those guys that you're like, oh, he's got a head coaching gig by January of next year because he's going to be one of the hottest names in the sport. It might not even be a Mateer thing. It might just simply be an Arbuckle is that great of a play caller. He did some amazing things at Wazoo last year. So it's going to work. They returned their 3 top running backs from last season, but oh wait, they also added Jaden Ott in from Cal, who was one of the best running backs last year and could have been a top 100 pick in the NFL draft. Wide receiver doesn't really pop off the chart in the way that you would want it to, but hopefully they avoid all the injuries that plagued them last season, specifically with their top option, Deion Burks. He's the guy that, if he can stay healthy for a full season, I do think he can be one of the premier targets in the sport. And again, I think the pass catchers will all be better because of the quarterback and the play caller they have alongside them this year. Brent Venables is back calling plays defensively. I know this might sound a little spicy, but this is the best front 7 in college football. Mason Thomas on the edge, Jaden Jackson and David Stone in the middle, Kip Lewis, Joby McKenzie, great linebackers. I think when it's all said and done, we'll be looking at this group being like, you know what? No one compared to the front 7 that we saw in Oklahoma. The secondary, kind of like the wide receiver room, doesn't really pop off the charts, but is still a top 20, 25 group in the country. and they'll get a lot of assistance from how great the front seven is above them. Okay, so you just named all these things you love about Oklahoma. Why aren't they higher than your 11th team in the nation? It starts up front offensively. I definitely need to see the offensive line play at a higher level. They were one of the worst Power 4 units all last season. Now, there were injuries. There were guys, in and out of the lineup. A bad quarterback that kind of probably held onto the ball a little too long at times. There are plenty of reasons to why you think it could be better. That being said, I still need to see it. It doesn't matter how talented you are at quarterback, receiver, running back. If your guys can't block for you, none of it will work. So that's the biggest reason that's holding me back from putting them inside that top 10. And then, kind of like with the Texas Tech thing, I guess I just have to see it all together on a field before I can put them any higher. To me, if this team doesn't pop off the charts, it's an indictment on Venables as a head coach. I think he's a fantastic defensive coordinator. And maybe that they don't even have to worry about this if the team sets the league on fire. But if they struggle with this roster construction and this quarterback and this offensive coordinator, I'm gonna have my reservations of Brent Venables as a successful head coach going down the road. But one of the hottest teams in the nation right now. There's so many reasons to buy into the hype. I'm all the way in. Oklahoma, my 11th team in the nation.
Blake. What?
So let's get sexy again. Let's go with the Florida Gators. I've got them as a top 10 team in the country. As I said at the beginning of this show, they have my heart, man. They really do. But it doesn't take heart or brain to realize that this roster is of top 10 caliber in the country, and that's why I have them here. So last year, closing out the season, they were one of the hottest teams in the nation. There's a ton of momentum building in Gainesville to this season. They've got a star at quarterback, DJ Lagway. We're obviously going to talk about him again in the reasons why I don't have Florida higher than 10. But for now, we're talking about the good. DJ Lagway has a chance to be a transcendent player in college football. He could set the entire league on fire this year, and Florida could be competing for an SEC title because of it. Now, there's reasons to think why it might not happen, but again, we're talking about the good right now. Outside of Lagway, there's still plenty to gush over offensively. Jordan Baugh might be my favorite running back in the SEC. They've got quality depth behind him, which is important to keep him fresh all year. This dude is going to light it on fire. They're going to have a really good run attack because they also have an awesome offensive line, one of the best 5 units in the nation. They return 4 of their starters from this past year. Super experienced, super talented group. They're also pretty deep on the perimeter. And the guy that I've got my eye on in the passing attack, because they did lose a couple guys to the NFL last year, Eugene Wilson is the guy I'm tagging as he's next. He's going to take the massive step. I believe he's either a redshirt sophomore or a redshirt junior. He's going to be the guy that ascends into stardom for this passing attack. But like I said, I think there's a couple guys behind him as well, too, that make it a pretty rounded out receiving room. They're consistently solid at every level of the defense. I love the guys that they have up front. Caleb Banks, one of the best defensive tackles in college football. Tyreek Sapp, George Gum on the edge. By the way, just 2 really good football names. Tyreek Sapp, George Gum. Those are some pass rushers I want on my football team. Really solid up front. They're good but not great at the linebacker room, but there's a ton of experience and talent in the secondary to make me feel really solid about the Gators defense heading into this year. Okay, so why don't I have Florida higher than my number 10 team in the nation? DJ Lagway is just one of those dudes that always seems to be banged up. Had a hamstring injury last year, barely threw during the spring with a shoulder issue. I believe he had a sports hernia surgery, and just recently returned to practice after dealing with a calf for a lot of the summer. This team will not reach its floor nor its ceiling if Lagway isn't running the show, if he's missing a couple games here and there. He is as much the face of this university as any player is in the sport. Extremely pivotal to have him on the field for all 12 games. So that's the biggest reason. And then the other one is just, Billy Napier. I defended him all last season when things were at its darkest. When it was like a month in and they were like, fire Billy Napier. I was like, I think this guy's got it. And it paid off because they finished, as I said, as one of the hottest teams in the nation. But with the 9 teams that I have above Florida here, they got a little bit more street cred at the head coach position than the one that was, felt like he was being fired halfway through last season. So that's another reason. Coach, quarterback, I have reservations from putting them in the top 9, and I think all these other teams have a pretty good standing above that. So let's see. We just ripped off. I want to go back and check on this. So we did LSU. We did what? We did LSU, Oklahoma, Florida. I've got my 4th SEC team in a row here. My number 9 team in the nation. Heading into the year, I am sipping on all the Texas A&M Kool-Aid. I think this team is more than capable of competing for an SEC title. Obviously, I am covering them for the Gig'em Gazette. Thank you if you are watching us from there. I support it. Hopefully you love my support for A&M because I think this is a really special football team. They just play a style of football I would hate to go up against if I was a head coach. The running back room has a lethal 1-2 punch in Le'Veon Moss and Reuben Owens, both back fully healthy for this year. One of the better tandems in the country. The offensive line is talented, experienced, mean, potentially a top 3 unit in the country. It's at least top 5. Mike Elko, probably one of my favorite head coaches in the league, and he'll have a stronger grip on the defense, especially up front this upcoming season. It's a scheme that does nothing but just muddy up the trenches with your front 7. So I think he's going to see a lot of improvement from that group. And they were good last year, littered with talent, but it didn't feel like it was a polished group. I think while this year's team might not have as much talent, it will be a stronger unit. Maybe the individual is not as much pop. The unit will be great. I think they've got 2 great linebackers, Taurine York, Scooby Williams, and they returned everyone from what was a really talented secondary. Safety Dalton Brooks might be one of the hardest hitting players in all of college football. That dude is ferocious, and again, speaks to the mentality of this team. This is just a muck it up, put you in a phone booth for 60 minutes, and the strongest man will live. And that's how they got through to, a really strong part of last season. They were 7-1 before things fell apart. And we'll talk about that in a second. So why don't I have Texas A&M any bit higher than my 9th team in the nation? A lot of it does come down to the intangibles. It was sloppy at the end of last season. The team ran out of gas. Now, Mike Elko said when he showed up to College Station, conditioning wasn't great on the roster. That makes a lot of sense. Why they lost 3 or 4 out of 5 down the stretch, whatever it ended up being, makes me feel a lot more comfortable that this time around, a full season, better condition, better capable to last a full 12 games into the season. The other reason why I'm not as high on A&M just yet, I think it'll take a step forward, but I haven't seen Marcel Reed be this prolific thrower of the football, and the receiving room last year was really, really bad. And they added in a couple of guys, Casey Concepcion, Mario Craver, that should be legit dudes at A&M and should form a pretty strong passing attack. I still need to see it. They weren't able to take a leap last year. They need to take a leap this year. There was, really big drops down the field, miscues on routes, very clunky passing attack. I think it will be better. I need to see it, which is why I can't put Texas A&M any bit higher than my 9th team in the nation. But as you can tell, I'm pretty dang high on them because I don't know how many people I see having A&M inside their top 10. Okay, so I'm going to have to explain this. I know you guys are going to be upset, or some of you will be upset with this. I've got last year's defending national champions down as my 8th best team in the nation. That's the Ohio State Buckeyes. So let's just get right into it before I can hear you start to yell at me through the future. Okay, so why do I have Ohio State as high as number 8? Let's talk about the good. It's pretty simple. They have the best offensive player in college football, and they have the best defensive player in college football. Best receiving room in the nation, obviously Jeremiah Smith, but also don't forget Carnell Tate. And they also added an all-conference tight end. I think he came over from Purdue. They had to reload at running back and offensive line, but reloaded well. James Peoples, C.J. Donaldson will be effective, and the offensive tackle that they brought in from Rice will most likely be heading to the NFL next year. Now, OSU, there's a few of these programs we're going to talk about. It's like, how do you replace this? How do you replace that? They just do it. They find a way to do it. And so it's not going to be that big of a drop-off from the offensive line and running back rooms as you might think. You do have to integrate a new quarterback, which a lot of these teams that have already talked about, are still going to talk about, have to do. But Julian Sayin should have things set up nicely for him here. The defense is great just about everywhere. We already talked about Caleb Downs, but they've got some good corners to go with him. Linebackers are a real strength this year with Sonny Styles and Avril Reese. And again, just as I said with running back and offensive line, every year there's just another couple great defensive ends waiting to take their turn. It's just been years of whether it was the Bosa brothers, or last year it was, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau. This year, it's going to be Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry. I'm sure it will be just as successful as it has been for the last however long. Okay, Blake, so you just talked about a really great team. Why do you have them at 8? I love the way that Ohio State reloads from a roster standpoint. Churn out more dudes year in, year out than most in the country, if not all. I didn't love the way they reloaded their coordinator room. I don't like the way they relocated their coordinator room, specifically on defense. Losing Jim Knowles, who might be the best defensive coordinator in football, and going to Matt Patricia, I think, is significant. And that's more to say how highly I think of Jim Knowles than it is to say how low I think of Matt Patricia. But I am curious how long it's going to take for Matt Patricia to get comfortable at the collegiate level. We just saw Wink Martindale come into Michigan last year. It took some time. Even though Michigan had 3 first-round picks on their defense, sometimes it's a little bit of a learning curve stepping down to the collegiate level and where things are done just a little bit differently. I also would say I think more highly of Wink Martindale than I do of Matt Patricia. This isn't out to be a clown Matt Patricia segment, but when we're talking about reasons why I might be a little bit down on Ohio State's defense, that's what sticks out to me, the drop-off from Jim Knowles to Matt Patricia. Like what if Arch and Sark come in week 1 and just hang 40 on Ohio State, just like they did Michigan last year, and then Penn State late in the year looks the best they ever have against Ohio State. Maybe they put up, 28, 35 points after they put up, barely anything this past season. It's a talented defense, but it's not the 2024 defense. So it'll be interesting to see how, from a coaching and player standpoint, they develop as the year goes on. Is it one of those things that, okay, you get embarrassed week 1 and you learn from your lumps and you're great by the end of the year? Or is it man, this new defensive coordinator really isn't cutting it, and now we're starting to tune him out as the year goes along? That's my biggest reason. And then I'll just say it again because I have to. The first-year responsibilities for Julian Sayin and even Brian Hartline at offensive coordinator might take a while to fully gel, and since I can't tell you with certainty one way or another what will happen, I have to have a question about it before the year starts. So Brian Hartline has been around Ohio State for a while. I think him being the play caller and offensive coordinator is a good move. Is it of Chip Kelly standards? And I know Chip had his struggles for a while, but is it at that same level? I don't know. So those are my questions for Ohio State. I know it's a little bit shocking having them this low. I've got them as my number 8 team heading into the new season. We got to keep things moving along. Dan Lanning is probably still my favorite coach in the sport. So I'm putting a lot of faith in him and his roster that's still littered with talent as my number 7 team in the country, despite having some pretty glaring questions on the roster. Okay, so why do I have them this high? Obviously, I just said Dan Lanning's great. The roster's littered with talent. They have reached the tier of the Ohio States and Alabamas and Georgia where it just reloads year in and year out, no matter how many dudes they lose. And I think Dan Lanning has done a really good job becoming one of the better coaches at adding impact players in the portal. The offensive line should still be a top 10 unit despite some key losses. It will feature 3 senior transfers coming in to join Emmanuel Pregnon and Yapani Lalolu. I don't think I did that right on the offensive line. Jordan James was the feature running back. They replaced him with Mekhi Hughes, who came in from Tulane, had 2 really good seasons there. And all reports are that Decorian Moore is going to be one of those, him freshman wideouts and should be the focal point of the passing game to go along with two talented playmaking tight ends. Will Stein is also one of my favorite play callers in the game, and I put a lot of stock into Dante Moore at the quarterback. Of these guys that we've said however many times, like, oh, it's a new quarterback, you have to work into the offense. Dante Moore is one of those dudes that I'm pretty bought in on, as will hit the ground running just fine at Oregon this season. There's a lot of changeover defensively. But Lanning is one of those coaches that I just think always gets the most out of his new rising pieces. Mateo Uiagalelei, yes, that's DJ's brother, will be the kind of focal point along the line. They added in Bear Alexander from USC, who transferred after playing a few games there last year. I think he's really talented. Hopefully it's the right fit. It seems like he's been struggling to find the right home. Hopefully Dan Lanning in Oregon is the right place. They have some of the best depth along the defensive line. Still strong at linebacker. Bryce Botcher, I believe, is the top guy there. So those are the reasons why I'm like, okay, Oregon isn't going to fall apart that much. Now, why I don't have them higher is, it doesn't always need to be this way in college football. But there is just that lack of star power household names. I would say both defensively and offensively, more specifically defensively. There's depth everywhere, but there's no surefire household name like they had last season. They lose 3 defensive linemen to the draft, linebacker to the draft. I just don't think they have that guy right now. He might be there come November. He's not there right now. They also lost so many dudes in the secondary, and it's not just the fact that you lose 4 starters from last year. So you lost 3 from the year before. 7 starters over a 2-year span is just a ton of turnover. It might take a while for things to really get humming on the back end of that defense. And I'll just say it, I love Dante Moore. I think he's going to be great. I need to see it offensively. So that's why I have Oregon in as my number 7 team in the nation. I think I did that a little bit quicker. Let's speed through these final 6. I don't want to keep you guys here too long. Number 6, the Georgia Bulldogs. The more and more I dug into this team, the higher they rose on my board. I think it's going to be another special season for the Bulldogs here in Kirby Smart. Now, why they're here, the obvious is the obvious. He's the best head coach in the sport. And despite having a younger defense than I would typically say they have most years, it's still bound to be one of the best in the nation. Here's the spicy nugget I want you to take from this episode, and just, if there's a future you can bet or a prop on there, I didn't look beforehand. Elo Madozie from Army transferred in to Georgia. Yes, you heard me right, Army. He's going to be playing edge at Georgia, and he might be the best player on that defense. Everything since he showed up has been really impressive, and he's just got that perfect size, speed, motor combo where we could be sitting here at the end of the year saying he's the best defender, best edge rusher, whatever it might be in the SEC or even greater in college football. He's that special of a dude, and I just wanted to get that out there so I can say I told you so a couple months from now. Now, of course, it's not just him. Christian Miller, Elijah Griffin, plug up the middle. Linebacker might be their best positional unit overall with C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson. Secondary is improved. Last year was a little bit of an issue if you think about all those chunk plays, especially against Alabama. Dalen Everett at corner, K.J. Bolden at safety. Those are the 2 dudes that'll lead the charge there. The biggest factor offensively might be the fact that they have a top 10 receiving room in the nation, which you could not say last year. Obviously, 2 years removed from Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey. It was a little bit weak last year. It might be another strength again. They have the best tight end room in the nation, Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, and they added Zachariah Branch from USC and Noah Thomas from Texas A&M on both the outsides. I think Noah Thomas was the leading receiver for an A&M last year. I know I just said their passing attack wasn't too great, but he was the leading guy out there. And Zachariah Branch, super talented player, I think could be in for a big year in the SEC. Quite the reload from a year where it just felt like they had zero threat on the outside. Ton of drops, ton of miscues. It was messy. It's going to be really good this year. The offensive line lost pieces to the NFL, but kind of like what I was saying with Dan Lanning, I just trust the year-in, year-out development of these guys under Kirby Smart. I'm not too worried about, a whole new group up front for the Georgia Bulldogs this year. Nate Frazier had a really nice season last year at tailback should be poised for a major jump sophomore season. That's a huge thing for Georgia to get back to, okay, we can actually be this dominant ground game type team. It was too hit or miss last season, needs to be better. So why don't I have them higher than 6? This is Georgia. How do you have 5 teams better than Georgia? In a world of comparing Georgia team to Georgia team, it feels like a lot of these units are still like 85% of what they'd usually be, especially when it comes to overall depth. Now, we're going to talk about this new era of football on Friday. Depth at Georgia isn't what it used to be. It's still better than a lot of places, but it's not what it was the last, 7-8 years under Kirby. A lot of these dudes are young and can grow into household names that we're accustomed to by November or even next season. It just hasn't had the opportunity to present itself yet, which is why we have to say it remains a question. There also seems to be this small contingency of people online that aren't the biggest fan of Mike Bobo as the team's offensive coordinator. I'll listen to those complaints. I'll watch the offense, and if they're struggling to run the football or if they can't get the ball to Zachariah Branch, maybe this dude isn't the best offensive coordinator for this program. I think they've made some nice upgrades where hopefully it's not as big of an issue as it was last year. And then, like I said, with Oregon, Oklahoma and Ohio State, I just need to see Gunnar Stockton facilitate at a high clip in this offense. It doesn't need to be, fantastic. It just needs to be reliable and someone the Bulldogs can win with. So those are why I don't have him any higher. But again, we're at number 6. We're talking about some of the best teams in the nation.
You want to go to war, Balaki?
All right, so thank you guys for bearing through all this with me. We are inching toward the finish line. I promise when we do these during the season, when we do conference previews, they're not going to be this long. I just want to highlight why I think so highly of these top 16. We've got 5 teams left. I refused to accept this next team all last season and got spanked left and right because of it. I've taken my lumps. I've accepted Notre Dame as one of the true powerhouses in this new era of college football. And again, my number 5 team heading into the new year. Okay, so why is Notre Dame all of a sudden your number 5 team in the country? There are maybe 5 positional groups on this roster. You could make the argument for being the best in the nation. So let's start on offense. Jeremiah Love is the best running back in the country. And don't forget Jadarian Price behind him. Their offensive line is healthy and stronger than a year before. I've got 4 guys right now on their starting 5 that should find their way to the NFL over the next couple of years. And that makes me feel of Notre Dame from 10 years ago, where it was just you got dude after dude after dude. Quentin Nelson. There was the tackle that went to San Francisco. I can't remember his name. Either way, it feels like this offensive line is just all NFL ready. They did lose 3 starters on the defensive line, but it still might be the deepest rotation in the sport. The edge room is loaded. Guys like Joshua Burnham, Bryce Young, Boubacar Traore, he was really talented last season, had a great year, got banged up. I expect a big jump for him this upcoming season. So they're great at edge. They return all their dudes at linebacker and the secondary, well, most of all their dudes, the ones that played a lot of last season. Christian Gray and Leonard Moore is probably the best cornerback tandem in the nation. I think they're fantastic. Christian Gray was a freshman last season. He might be just in a few years, you're talking about him as shut down NFL type corner. Really love that duo back there. And man, even at wide receiver, a group that I thought was pretty rough for them last year, added Malachi Fields from UVA. And I think he'll be the number 1 target, which is not only great to have a guy like that, but it also makes Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison just kind of fit into those more complementary roles, makes the passing game as a whole that much better. So all those reasons, on top of Marcus Freeman just being one of the best head coaches in this sport, last year was just the runway of no, I'm actually him. So those are the reasons why I love Notre Dame. Why don't I have them higher than number 5? I've talked myself into a lot of these other quarterbacks more than I have with CJ Carr. Now, I could look like an idiot in November. I very well might. And look, Notre Dame didn't need Riley Leonard to be amazing for them to be good last season. But when I think of the teams I have ahead of Notre Dame here at 5, they've got a little bit more juice than CJ Carr does. I also don't love the fact that early on in the season they go up against Miami and Texas A&M, 2 teams in my top Sweet 16. could be tough to really get a good confidence going for the young quarterback if he struggles in those two games. And then the last thing why I don't have Notre Dame higher, Al Golden was just an awesome defensive coordinator. I think he won Assistant of the Year last year. He goes up to be the defensive coordinator for the Bengals. Big loss. Like I said, I still love the coaching staff there. Hopefully they can make up for it, but that would be just another reason to be a little bit iffy on Notre Dame, as that's a huge loss in itself. The last thing I'll say on Notre Dame, so help me God, if I buy into this program finally and they put up a stinker this season, I will be livid. Livid. All right, number 4, the Clemson Tigers. It would be the biggest mic drop of the decade if Dabo Swinney could win another national title this year. And thankfully, I think his team is loaded and one of the favorites to do so. So let's just go through why. The positions that matter the most, they're great at. Cade Klubnik, one of the best, if not the best quarterback in the nation. High expectations for him this upcoming season. He'll be throwing to a terrific set of wide receivers, something 2 years ago you wouldn't have said. And even last year you had questions about. You're like, man, they don't really have a ton of guys. Well, they're 3 freshmen, all rising into big years in 2025. That is Antonio Williams, Bryant Wesco, TJ Moore. As a group, outside of Ohio State, it might be the best in the nation. I think it's a top 2 to 3 unit. We'll talk about one of those other units in just a second. Clemson, really great wide receiver room. Huge for Cade Klubnik's development as a quarterback and his ability to produce at a high clip. They probably have the best trench play in all of college football. On the offensive side, they returned 4 starters from last year and made a strong addition at left guard. And defensively, as we were talking about with LSU's preview, because they have a big week 1 game coming, up front, it's just silly how talented Clemson is. TJ Parker, Peter Woods might be the best individual guys at their respective positions. And it seems as though the addition of Will Helt will be a really nice guy in complementing at the edge. Don't forget, they're also great at the back end, top 5 secondary, and probably the second best corner tandem behind Notre Dame's in Avion Terrell, which, yes, A.J. Terrell's little brother, and Ashton Hampton. So I just gave you the most important positions in football, and I gave you reasons why Clemson is fantastic at all of them. So why wouldn't I have them higher than 4? Running the ball and stopping the run. I think the offensive line is great, and it should open up opportunities for their running backs. But I loved Phil Maffa, and his departure is a huge loss for this team now in the NFL. Remains to be seen what they get out of the room. Hopefully there is that guy that emerges as a feature. My bet would be transfer Gideon Davidson, but we don't know who that's going to be just yet. And then the run defense was subpar last year despite their talents up front. And I think highly of the linebacker room as well too, but for some reason it just couldn't gel. Hopefully with the addition of Tom Allen in as defensive coordinator, their run game can really step up in the way that we've seen Penn State's the last few years. I should have mentioned that as well too. That's a huge get for Clemson, getting Tom Allen in to run that defense. And then the last thing I'll say about why I don't have Clemson just like inches higher, there is something about them playing in the ACC that makes it feel a little mirage-y at times, if that's a word. I just struggle to be like fully bought in when I don't get to see them face elite programs throughout the season, and when they do, they lose, going 0-3 to the SEC last season. That was Georgia. They got smoked. They lost to South Carolina at the end of the year, and then lost to Texas in the college football playoffs. So again, it's not the biggest indictment. You can be a great team in a not great conference, but it just makes me feel a little iffy. And to go along with, stopping the run and running the football, why I can't put Clemson in my top 3. All right, so there's 3 teams that you have yet to hear me say. The order of them, I hope, doesn't make you all too mad. My number 3 team in the nation, one of the premier programs in the country, it's the Texas Longhorns. So why are the Texas Longhorns my number 3 team in the nation? They have one of the best head coaches and play callers in the nation with Sark. There is no denying that. I am so happy that he's found his groove here in Austin. They operate one of the best running back rooms in the country to go along with C.J. Baxter, Contrevion Wisner. Great receivers again, despite losing their top 3 pass catchers from last year. I mean, they've done that year in, year out. 2 years ago it was Adonai Mitchell and Xavier Worthy. Then it was Matthew Golden and the other guy, I can't remember. This year I expect it to be Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore to lead the charge there. Same thing as all these other programs. They just reload and replace the pieces they lose. Defensive tackle, I'll give you. It might not be as polished as the years before. There's not going to be an NFL draft pick probably from this group, at least not in the first couple of rounds. But on the edge, Colin Simmons and Trey Moore are going to be such a prolific duo. It's almost like they've swapped out the defensive tackle studs for the defensive end studs this year. They're going to be huge and getting into the backfield. And one of my favorite players in the entire sport is on this defense, Anthony Hill Jr. I think he's the best linebacker in football. And they also went and added Brad Spence in from Arkansas to work as a nice tandem there at the linebacker position. Just like I've said, at wide receiver, at defensive line, the secondary, it's next man up mentality. Safety Michael Taff, corners Malik Muhammad and Kobe Black will lead the way there. Obviously lost some talented pieces last year. These guys are just waiting in the wing for their opportunities. So I think that's it. Oh, wait, except I forgot to mention to you that there's this guy starting at quarterback this year. He's supposed to be pretty good or something. I think his last name is Manning. So that's why I think Texas is great. The only reason I couldn't put them at number 2 or number 1, I guess I say it at the end every time, still need to see Arch play. I don't think it's actually going to be bad. I think it's going to be fantastic. I don't think it's going to take a while, but in case it does, still remains to be a little bit questioned. He's been with that offensive system the last few years, actually got some good reps in whenever Ewers was hurt, so I don't have my concerns there. I am, however, slightly worried about the offensive line. They lost 4 starters from last year and do have to face the defensive fronts of Ohio State and Florida early on in their schedule. So just like I think there was another team we were talking about earlier where it's like a lot of new pieces, but a tough schedule to get your feet wet. It was LSU. That being said, last year's offensive line wasn't all too great. So it might be one of those like addition by subtraction situations where they're better just with a fresh start along the offensive line. Still, one of the best teams in the country, one of those teams that should be competing for a national championship, the Texas Longhorns, my number 3 team in the nation. I don't know how this should be such a polarizing take, but I think it is my most polarizing take of my top 16. The Alabama Crimson Tide are my number 2 team heading into 2025. Now imagine at any point of the last decade being like, oh yeah, I'm the one that's high on Alabama. Where do I even begin? First off, everyone will apologize to Kalen DeBoer by the end of this season. He will ascend right back into that top 5 head coaches in the country list, and he's going to make a lot of people eat their words. I also love the addition of his longtime offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb. He will have this offense operating at a way it did in Washington. I have no worries about this offense making a huge jump in year 2. The hand-holding era is over at Alabama. I think DeBoer had to do a lot of that to keep his roster intact. That's over. His guys are here. And because of that, all these things, these intangibles, explosive play rate, turnovers, penalties, they're going to improve drastically after they were some of the worst in the country. So Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb in itself are a huge reason why I'm buying into Alabama. And then, oh yeah, you have this unbelievable roster in Tuscaloosa. Let's start with the defense. The best defense in the country. You heard me. Best defense in the country. LT Overton, potential star at edge. Tim Keenan III stuffs up the middle, and they added in a quality transfer from Florida and Kelby Collins. So that's the front line. Linebacker is incredibly deep, despite losing Jahad Campbell to the NFL. Deontay Lawson is leading the way there. And I think the most impressive job that they have done since Kalen DeBoer took over was retooling this secondary. It is fantastic. It rivals Notre Dame for best in the country. And not only in just elite talent starting, but a ton of great depth behind them. This is not just like I've got one dude and the rest is a little shaky. It's everywhere. And think about that for a second. You know, they lost Caleb freaking Downs when Nick Saban retired. And I'm here saying that their secondary is the strength of this roster just a year and a half later. It's incredible. Oh, and not to mention, they're still great on offense. Top 10 units on the offensive line, at running back, wide receiver. Ryan Williams is obviously the name that steals the show, but Jeremy Bernard and Isaiah Horton that they brought in from Miami, just Isaiah, Jeremy was already there. This will be one of the best trios in the country, and it just makes me kind of like envision how great the trio Washington had a few years ago that was led by Roma Dunze and oh, God, I forget the other two that were with them, Jalen Polk, and there was one other guy there, but it was just like this awesome trio of dudes. I think this is a really talented trio. Ryan is definitely better than any of those guys. Maybe the depth isn't there, but that being said, I love the receiving room. I think Ty Simpson will do just fine in this offense. And like I've said with a couple of these guys, if he is just efficient and stable, the pieces around him will do the rest, and this offense will operate at a very high level. So that is why I have Alabama at number 2. Okay, well, why don't you have them at number 1? Just like everybody else. I need to see the quarterback run the system effectively before I give them the glam of being the best team in the country. Ty Simpson could be the perfect fit for Ryan Grubb's offense, but he could also struggle out the gate. Florida State isn't like a joke of a week 1 matchup, so if he fails to bring consistency to the group, then I would have to draw back a little bit. So that's why I have my questions there. This roster is one certainly capable of winning a national championship. I'm stunned people aren't seeing it as clearly as I am. Alabama is fantastic heading into this season. And, man, I really want to take them to win it all. I think it would just be the biggest slap in the face for Kalen DeBoer. I would love it. All right, and that brings me to my number 1 team in the nation. You obviously haven't heard me talk about them yet. It is the Penn State Nittany Lions. Let's just rattle all these off. Great head coach. I love him. I know he hasn't won the big game. He hasn't won the big game yet. James Franklin is fantastic. They have the best coordinator duo in the nation. Andy Kotelnicki, one of my favorite play callers in the sport, and Jim Knowles. You know how I just talked about Jim Knowles left Ohio State? Yeah, he's at Penn State. I think it's one of the biggest hires we saw all offseason. And still makes up for the loss of Tom Allen. Like, oh, you can consider Tom Allen a loss. Jim Knowles makes it, oddly enough, an upgrade. So I think it's a fantastic coaching staff at the top specifically. Drew Aller, my guy, top 3 quarterback in the nation, set for a huge season. Best running back tandem in the country with Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, and what I believe to now be a top 15-ish wide receiver room with the additions of Trebor Pena, Devontae Ross, and Kyron Hudson. I also think they have the best offensive line in the nation. Returned 4 starters from last year. And just about everybody is a 5th or 6th year senior on that group. It's not just that they're talented, they're experienced. They've spent a ton of time working together. Defensively, they lose Abdul Carter, but still have one of the best 5-6 defensive lines in the nation. Zane Durant is in the middle. Denai Dennis Sutton is the hopeful next healthy freak edge. And Zariah Fisher on the opposite side completing out that front. Don't worry because the linebacker is also a top 5 to 10 unit in the country. They added Amari Campbell from UNC, and he'll join Dom DeLuca and Tony Rojas as what will be, as I said, another elite group in the middle level of that defense. But hey, their secondary is ass. Kidding! Also a top 5 unit in the nation, led by A.J. Harris at corner, Zakee Wheatley at safety, and Zion Tracy in the slot. I just went through every position group outside of tight end, and I told you all the reasons to love it. Obviously, I have them at 1, so there's no reasons to discuss why I don't have them higher, but I'll give you why maybe I shouldn't have them higher. I'll allow the argument that we need to see this passing game flourish before I gush more about Aller and his new receivers. That's fine. You can have that. I just need 2 of these wideouts to hit for me to feel like it could really get humming. But we haven't seen it, so I'll allow you guys to question it until it's on a football field. And then it's also fair to say, as to why I shouldn't have Penn State this high, is because they are Penn State. And it's not the fact that they are incapable of winning the big ones, it's just that they haven't yet. You can clearly tell I'm super high on Penn State. I think this is maybe the team to beat this season. Will they be the team I picked to win it all? Maybe not. We have to wait and see a few weeks for that. But that is my Sweet 16. I'm not going to run through it because we did run a little bit longer than I had anticipated on this show. If you stuck around, thank you. You know, we're pushing over an hour, and I never wanted these things to go more than that. Thank you. for interacting with the show. Again, if you're on YouTube, hit a like, hit a comment, subscribe to the channel, share it. If you're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast, like, subscribe, 5-star review. I love doing this. I've had so much fun both on Sunday recording, we're recording on Tuesday today. Doing these shows and talking college football is so exciting. I can't wait to do it throughout the course of this season. If you're on social media, head to TikTok and Twitter at SpringBlake'S. Check out my writing for Texas A&M football at the Gig'em Gazette. I love you. I appreciate you. I'll talk to you in a few days. Peace.